Hey everyone, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. Things are not slowing down on the battle lines, so let's do a quick update and then we're going to talk about the coming winter campaign and what we can expect from it. So first things first, let's be clear about the situation. I mentioned that Ukrainians have landed and essentially pushed the Russians out of the Kinburn Peninsula. But I want to make clear that that doesn't mean that Ukraine has secured this area and there are now like Ukrainian assets and they have trench lines and so on. They don't. This whole area here pretty much is a no man's land. It's very little that can be done here to secure this area. As I explained, the ground here is not the best to dig in. And so it's both very hard for Russians to defend this area, but at the same time, it's also very hard for Ukrainians in this area to then essentially settle down and make some kind of a defensive position. So we'll have to wait and see, but just to make sure, the fact that Ukrainians were able to push Russians out of some places does not mean that Ukrainians have captured those. It just became a gray zone where no major military assets are present and it might be changing hands. Just so we're clear with that one. Before we start talking about the winter campaign, let's quickly jump into the general perspective and the situation. So we know that Russians, after leaving Kherson, have been using Mariupol as their base of recoup and relaxation and establishing those units that suffered casualties in the Kherson Oblast. And by now we have seen both movement and moving out, and we also have reports on when these moving outs of these troops are happening. So we know that and remember that these was the battle capable troops. It was the VDV, the airborne troops, the Marines, so like the elite of the Russian army that they still have left. And these troops are now being sent both to the north. A small portion of them are being sent towards the Donetsk area, though this front is still kind of more or less being controlled by the the separatists, let's call it that way, like the terrorists from Ukrainian side. Then quite a lot being sent into the area around Vuhledar, and then another part of them is being sent to the area around Hulaypole. And let's quickly talk about all of them one by one. So first things first, the North campaign. So here, Ukraine slowly but surely is continuing advancements towards the Svatove-Kreminna line. It's happening maybe like a couple of 100 meters, a kilometer a day, so not fast enough, but Ukrainians are very close to Svatove-Kreminna. So in that sense, we also know that the Russian troops that are coming in, they already are trying to establish the Shastia. They're mostly focused around Shastia Starobilsk line. So it seems that they are trying to prepare their essentially second line of defense, and they are already preparing that the first line of defense might pretty much fall, or at least they're already thinking with some kind of forward memento of as if that one falls, then we need to be prepared at the second line, which is understandable. So we'll see if Ukraine will be able to take it. But all in all, this is the situation at the north. If now we go a little bit southern area, so Bakhmut is Wagner-controlled territory, and we actually have heard here that Ukrainians are getting some reinforcements in the area. So as funny as it sounds, it is not unlikely to expect that we might see that Ukraine will do some push, maybe from Bakhmut towards Popasna. I'm not saying it will happen, but I've definitely heard rumors and possibilities about it from some of the analysts. So we'll have an eye to look out for. Any kind of movement has been pretty much slowing down around Avdiivka here. And the Russians obviously are trying to attack, but it's a tactical warfare. They're trying to encircle Avdiivka, but they're not really succeeding in any fast pace whatsoever. Ukraine still has reserves in the area, but I think the general staff of Ukraine understands the situation and they're controlling it quite well. I would not worry about Avdiivka. This, of course, does not mean that the battles there are not hard fought. They are. The same hard fort battens and whatever I said just now also applies to Marinka. The Nevelske position here is holding, though it's being quite heavily attacked. And now let's talk about the south part and what is the goal of Russia here and what is the goal of Ukraine here. We start with Vuhledar. So we've heard that a lot of fighting is happening around Vuhledar and around Pavlivka. This position is interesting because this is something that is very relevant both for Ukrainians to both hold and advance forward in direction with, and it's also very important for Russians to capture and advance forward with. For Ukrainians, their plan is, if you can see these white lines over here, those are the railway networks. So Russia really wants these railway networks to be operational, so they have better capacity to supply troops in the south now with the Crimean bridge being out and all. And HIMARS now being able to target a lot of the roads leading out of Crimea. That is not an ideal position to be in. That's why Ukrainians really want to get into Volnovakha. This is the village basically that would allow not only to cut this rail line, but also establish some control around the main roads in this area with some artillery shells. Right now, Volnovakha is able to be shelled by the field artillery, but obviously Ukrainians would like to control that settlement very much. So the goal of Ukrainians, hold Vuhledar and then advance towards Volnovakha. This obviously later on would also open the ability to advance towards Mariupol. That is kind of would be the desired position in this area. For the Russians, the plan and the desire here would be essentially opposite. What they're interested in is capturing Vuhledar, and from Vuhledar advance both obviously to the north, but more importantly to advance towards Marinka from the backside, because Marinka is a big stronghold. It's been attacked non-stop pretty much from the start of this war. It's a huge stronghold position for Ukrainians, and obviously Russians would like to break it free, so then open the access to this road and ability to advance further. That's their plan around this area. If we then go to the next major stronghold, it's the stronghold of Hulaypole, which is here. This is a major advancement point for the Ukrainians. So since I'm having the red color here, Russian plan here is actually to obviously prevent Hulaypole, but also advance further and go to Pokrovske to start cutting this supply road. If you see the highway that's leading towards Marinka, again influencing the supply somehow towards Marinka, so cutting the Zaporizhia part. And further down the line, a more kind of far-fetched, probably unrealistic, is ability to reach Pavlohrad and then kind of get encirclement going and then go north towards Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. It's a complete dream scenario. They are out of their mind if they think that this will work. For the Ukrainians, Hulaypole, firstly, as it's explained, it's a major stronghold that's very hard for Russians to breach. And secondly, they can go to Polokhy, and then there is nice junction over here where a lot of rails are coming together. So if Ukrainians would be able, they would like to get to this point, because here they would be able to both cut all of the rail line, especially to Berdyansk or from Berdyansk, and also this rail line if it's operational or not. But more importantly, the road network would be complicated even more. So this is the second position where major challenges. And then we go to the core operation. Reaching Volnovakha, or basically this position here, or maybe Tokmak, they're kind of more or less similar, for Ukraine would mean that it would essentially cut either in position 1, in position 2, or in position 3, it would cut off the southern groupings that Russians are having around Melitopol. Russian groupings around Melitopol are having trouble. Remember, Kerch Bridge is now gone for a while because HIMARS are now targeting some of the movement around here, so it's hard to how to move. And the fact that Ukrainians are here and able to shell Volnovakha, it's also preventing the rail line. This group right here is having a lot of troubles getting supply is in. So it can be starved if Ukrainian has any kind of achievements on the lines that I just showed you. So that's why it's so important for Russians to get Ukraine out of this grouping. So the goal of Russians, the plan of them, as I explained, it's potentially go to Pavlograd, to then siege Dnipro, to siege Zaporizhia, and then go like kind of big approach towards Slavyansk and Kramatorsk. It's completely ridiculous. I don't know what they're thinking. So more realistically, we might see that there's going to be some action around Donetsk, where Russians will try to move Ukrainians away from Donetsk so the city itself is not shelled. But other than that, they don't really have any good position so far. That is the plan of Russians and the plan of Ukrainians for the coming winter. People have asked me to comment on whether or not the winter, what it will mean for Russian and Ukrainian attacks. And the long story short, it's going to intensify the fightings. I don't understand. Most of the people that I hear saying that the winter is going to slow down the battles is people like journalists, you know, some people that are probably judging by some kind of a very layman logic. Whenever I'm hearing some kind of analysts about they knowing how Ukrainians are fighting and how Russians are fighting, everyone is just saying, no, like the winter, I mean, it's going to consume more resources, like you will need heating, you will need more gasoline, you will need more everything, but it will be a period of more active combat. So the notion that winter will slow down activities is quite flawed in its core. And to also talk about winter, I think one thing that we must be aware of is just how bad Russians are doing in the winter. Russians' shortage of logistics and their logistical chains that have been disrupted by Ukraine are gonna pay off in the winter time big. Because while Russians have been mobilizing a lot of troops, they are struggling for equipment. While maybe they can find some Kalashnikovs, they can find ammunition, they can find shells, they can maybe find trucks with those shells. We're getting a lot of the reports, and I'm going to put some videos here that to run in the background. We're getting reports that Russia are not having the basic equipment necessary for their troops. Their troops is literally living in self-made tents or tents with holes in them. They are having the heating equipment is essentially a pit with some firewood in it, and they are struggling because they don't have a proper heating, proper conditions and ability to fight. And in winter, we know that this will bring the morale of the troops. Let's put it this: it's going to create this constant sense of tiredness because people are going to be focusing more on survival rather than fighting. And at some point, you know, like how can you think about who's going to shell or what's the better tactical maneuver or like which position should I attack if the first thing you think about is like, I don't have any food for tomorrow. That is the position Russian troops are in. And we need to understand that this is this wave of mobilization. If Russia, and when Russia is going to start mobilize the next portions of the troops, it's going to be even worse because the equipment is not coming back. Russia is having a critical shortage of resources. And additionally, their structural problems are still the same. I've talked about it many times. Watch my Why Russia is Shit video. It has all been there. Russian forces are in extreme position right now. Winter is definitely going to be favoring Ukraine because the logistical networks for Ukraine are there. They've completely covered the Kherson front right now, so they can concentrate on actual definitive strikes. And I believe once the colds really hit Ukraine, that's when we're going to see some kind of action happening on the battlefront. With that said, I want to end it here. A very short and sweet update for you today. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much to all of the beautiful patrons and supporters of this channel. I support at least 50%. I send at least 50% of the profits I get from this channel to support Ukrainian army. But I would advise you to support Ukrainians directly. All the links for how to support Ukraine is in the first link post of this video. I love you all. See you next time, and Slava Ukraini.